Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Prime Minister Imran Khan is back from his first US visit. We did a pre-Khan-Trump meeting opener last week to see what was expected. We also said that we shall revisit some features of that discussion after the visit, and today's program is about that. The thrust of our discussion last week was that while there will be standard talking points, Afghanistan, terrorism, talks with the Taliban, US extricating from Afghanistan, etc., there will be off-script moments since both leaders believe in a personalized style of diplomacy. That's what happened. They hit it off, and President Trump, in response to a question about occupied Kashmir, said, so I was with Prime Minister Modi 2 weeks ago, and we talked about this subject, and he actually said, would you like to be a mediator or arbitrator? I said, where? He said, Kashmir. Because this has been going on for many, many years. I was surprised at how long. This statement put a bee in India's bonnet, with the Indian media, especially TV channels, shrieking about it the entire day. There was ruckus in Indian Parliament with a beleaguered Rahul Gandhi accusing Modi of a sellout. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs issuing a statement saying no such conversation happened, essentially accusing Trump of lying. The Inside the Beltway spoilers are already in play, with analyses saying Pakistan has played the US again. Our discussion last week pointed to this possibility by referring to the fact that the invitation came outside the system, and systems don't like anyone bypassing them. Trump's main concern is Afghanistan. He wants Afghanistan to help the US extricate and get a deal. Khan said that he will do his best to induce the Taliban to accede to a deal. He repeated this at the USIP event. To discuss Trump's offer of mediation between India and Pakistan and his pressing desire to get out of Pakistan, we are joined by Dr. Moeed Yusuf, who's an Associate Vice President Asia at the USIP, Dr. Rifaat Hussain, who is Head of Public Policy at NUST, Mr. Geelani, who is an analyst based in Srinagar, and Tanya, Goudsouzian, who is an analyst based in Istanbul. But let me begin with Moeed Yusuf, because Moeed, you had a ringside view, especially at the USIP event. Also last week, you told us that this invitation was from outside the system, and there are likely to be off-script moments. And as I said in my opening, there were off-script moments. Now, my question to you, that when I did a pre-Trump Khan meeting assessment with you last week, there was a sense that the invite was, as I said, made outside the system. And while there would be a few standard talking points like Afghanistan, terrorism, etc., and perhaps FATF and IMF, etc., on the Pakistani side, there's likely to be something off script. Do you think that happened in the way that I said it did in my opening?
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, how it happened. We're getting all sorts of press reporting now, but Prime Minister Imran Khan spoke at the US Institute of Peace publicly to a think tank audience, said exactly that he was very surprised at the hospitality. He hit it off very well with President Trump. President Trump, even before the meeting, praised him a lot during this photo spray that they had. We haven't had much reaction, interestingly, from him after the meeting, but from everything one's picked up, it's very clear that, going into the meeting, it was a 50-50. I mean, they could have hit it off, or it couldn't have. It could have gone badly, because they are very unpredictable, off-script personalities in that sense. But I think they did. They have clicked, and everything that everything I got from this was that they felt there was a connection. They felt that President Trump was very genuinely wanting Pakistan support on Afghanistan, and signaling that could open doors to a better bilateral relationship.
Okay, so the Indian media, as I said, went berserk, referring to Trump's statement that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi had asked him to mediate on Kashmir. The Indian official statement says that Modi never asked for such mediation. What's your sense of why Trump said that?
Well, you can trust a spanner in the works every time something like this happens. I mean, this was... I don't think anybody could have predicted what President Trump said. Look, I mean, if Prime Minister Modi came out and asked the US President for this is a complete break from India's long-standing position on third parties mediating in Kashmir. So I'm not entirely sure that could have been said in that way, although just today I've again seen a US State Department official arguing that, President Trump would not have made up something. So, we really don't know. But the bottom line is, I don't think there is any appetite in the US system to make US a formal part of mediating Kashmir. That said, if I were to be objective on this, not looking at it from a Pakistani perspective, but truly objective, I do think these have been 3 bad days for Indian diplomacy. President Trump said what he did. Pakistan actually got a resounding sort of welcome. The delegation, the community event, if you will, the 20,000 people who came together. I mean, it was much like Prime Minister Moeed of India getting Madison Square filled with Indian diaspora. So, I mean, this really was a show of strength by the Pakistani delegation. I don't think you have to be Pakistani or Indian or American to debate that. I think it's really what one saw is everybody feels this trip went better than expected if you are a champion of improved Pakistan-US relations. So, in as much as India and Pakistan spend a lot of time trying to undercut the other diplomatically, this may have been a bad week for Indian diplomacy in the sense of optics, at least. I don't think, as I said, it changes the substance of Kashmir or the US policy on it.
Finally, Moeed, at the USIP event, Prime Minister Khan said that the Afghan Taliban wanted to meet him, but he couldn't meet them then. However, now having met with President Trump and also President Ghani of Afghanistan, he's going to meet with them and do his best to get them to start talking to the Afghan government. Do you think he can swing that?
Yeah, I mean, meeting them or not meeting them, I don't think that's neither here nor there. I mean, I don't think the Pakistani Prime Minister has to meet them to give impetus to the current peace process. If he does, I think that the door is open. The US would welcome that. At the end of the day, I do think that it was crucial for the US and Pakistan to agree on how they're going to work together from here on to a peace deal in Afghanistan. And again, one doesn't have any details, of course, but it seems very clear that they walked out of their meetings believing that there was some understanding. And if I were to conjecture, the understanding, of course, is that the Taliban have to be brought to the table to negotiate with the Afghan counterpart so that it could truly become an Afghan negotiation. That's where I think Pakistan probably would have promised to deliver. And I think Pakistan now will make all the efforts it can. The US will too. So I think I'm optimistic. I mean, there are hurdles. There are going to be roadblocks and, it's not going to be smooth. But I do think President Trump genuinely wants a deal as soon as possible and to declare victory and perhaps even withdraw, with only a residual force left behind. So I think there is an opportunity here. There is a true, genuine meeting of the minds and interest, which Pakistan and the US have not had in the past 17 years, quite frankly. Both have been saying it, but they really have had more divergences than convergences. For the first time, I think that's changing, not only because of this trip, but because where the situation is and what the US President and, of course, Prime Minister Imran Khan has been saying this as he says all the time for a number of years, that's where we should go, a peace deal. And so I think there is an opportunity. And we'll wait and see whether he meets the Taliban directly or not. I think is immaterial in this.
Thank you, Moeed, for your insights. As always, we're now going to bring the discussion to our other guests, starting with Mr. Geelani. Mr. Geelani, the very mention of Kashmir seems to just get the Indian media's knickers in a twist. Why is that?
Well, Mr. Haider, as I also mentioned in my book, there's an 8th chapter which is about the media wars, and it's mostly on how Indian media portrays the Kashmir story and how biased they are and how they are, removed from the ground reality in Kashmir, and how in the absence of facts, they rely mostly on propaganda, falsehood, and provocation. So this is the case again. I mean, they are calling Mr. Trump a liar, a gappebaz, and whatnot. I mean, when the same Mr. Trump says something against Pakistan, for example, or calls Pakistan to, impress upon Pakistan to do something against terrorism, then the Trump is the, president of the largest, the democracy, vibrant democracy in the world. But when the same Trump talks about Kashmir or offers his mediation, so then he becomes a gappebaz or a liar. So, but coming to the larger point, I think most of the conflicts like the Northern Ireland, East Timor, or South Sudan, or Kosovo, Serbia, have mostly been resolved by the third-party mediation. And people in Kashmir do not understand why there is so much of allergy, why New Delhi is allergic to third-party mediation. It's very, very sad.
I'm going to return to you, Mr. Geelani, but let me just throw the ball Dr. Hussain here. Dr. Hussain, Ministry of External Affairs, which is India's Ministry of External Affairs, they referred in their statement to Shimla and also Lahore, and of course stressed bilateral talks. Now, the two problems here. One is that neither the Shimla Agreement nor the Lahore Memorandum of Understanding preclude third-party mediation as far as Kashmir is concerned. Two, bilateralism has not taken India and Pakistan anywhere. So this focus on bilateralism essentially seems to indicate that, well, we just do not want to resolve this, and in the event that you want this resolved, it will have to be on our, as in India's terms.
Well, Ejaz, the most important thing about Shimla Agreement is that it is true that it does talk about both sides agreeing to a bilateral solution. But the preamble to the Shimla Agreement talks about the UN Charter, and the UN, according to the UN and the UN Charter and its principles. So, which means when the two sides are committing themselves to a bilateral solution, they are committing themselves within the frame of the UN Charter, and UN Charter recognizes the Kashmir dispute as the bilateral dispute, as the international dispute between the two countries. That's one thing. And I think it's the Article 5 or the Article 6, which says that Kashmir is a pending issue which both countries commit themselves to resolving. So, of course, we know the background to the signing of the Shimla Agreement, because Pakistan has lost the war or was not in a position to dictate to the Indians that they will agree to the Kashmiri right of self-determination. But according to Pakistani interpretation, there is a more liberal and permissive interpretation of the Shimla Agreement, according to which the two countries agree to a bilateral settlement. If the bilateralism fails, then both countries are free to invoke the third party's intercession. That's one. The second, I think, is very important, is that the Indians are accusing White House, essentially President Trump, of lying to them. I do not think that I do not want to defend his record as an honest person, but in this case, I think the Indians are obfuscating the issue, because there is a specific context, and he quoted the conversation that took place between him and Prime Minister Modi on the sidelines of the Osaka summit. So I do not think that in this case the Indians can get away with murder by accusing the White House of being completely lying about it. Now, my understanding of the issue is that there was a reference to Kashmir in the context of Modi and Trump's meeting, and then Modi asked for his help. So, but the question was that should Trump have spilled the beans, that this is what Modi approached him and this is what he told him, and the Indians are furious over this breach of what they consider to be a private conversation. But they, of course, will outright and flatly deny that such a conversation took place. But the State Department, it's very interesting that the White House has recalled the conversation. President Trump has said in that many words, he has quoted the phrases that were used during that during the conversation between him and Modi. But the State Department is putting a spin. They are trying to walk back what they consider to be a verbal excess committed by President Trump, by saying that they believe that the Kashmir issue is a bilateral matter, which they leave it to both the leadership of Islamabad and New Delhi to sort it out. But the fact remains that Trump has finally recognized the reality, and he has spoken his mind.
Okay. I have a theory with reference to why Trump mentioned Kashmir and what possible conversation might have happened between him and Modi. And I will present that theory to you and also to Mr. Geelani. But let me just quickly go to Tanya here with reference to Afghanistan. So, Tanya, we know that one of the reasons Trump gave this invitation to Prime Minister Khan is because he really, before the next election campaign were to begin, wants to get a deal on Afghanistan. And he definitely wants Pakistan to facilitate that. And Prime Minister Khan, interestingly, at the White House also and at the USIP event also, he said that he will do whatever he can to get the Taliban. In fact, at the USIP event, he went on to say that the Taliban wanted to meet with him, but he couldn't. But now that he has met with President Trump and also met with President Ghani, he is going to talk to the Taliban and meet with them and get them to, sign a deal. What do you think of this?
Well, in his comments, Prime Minister also said that he did not think there was a military solution to the crisis in Afghanistan. He's absolutely right. The fact is, yes, as you pointed out, the Americans are looking to get out of Afghanistan, and they're looking for the Pakistanis to assist them. Whether or not this is possible remains to be seen. I mean, one has to remember that there is more than. Taliban is only one armed group operating in the country. There are many others, and what guarantee that a peace deal with the Taliban means peace in Afghanistan? Just today, there were 3 attacks, and only one of them was claimed by the Taliban. The others, we're still waiting to find out who committed those acts.
How do you include it? I mean, the effort here is on the American side also and also on the Pakistani side to get the Taliban to ultimately talk to the Afghans, because the idea is that once you break through that barrier, then you actually get the Afghans to lead this process.
But break through the barrier at what cost? What kind of concessions are being made? I mean, there's been a draft agreement leaked where we're referring to Afghanistan as the Islamic Emirate. The Americans appear to be making concessions, including the release of 13,000 Taliban prisoners, and all of this based on Taliban promises, no actual commitments that they will actually carry out what they're saying they will. There is no guarantee that they're even able to stop Afghanistan from being used as a safe haven for other terror groups. This is just on the basis of anything that they'll say to get back to power.
Okay.
And
let me put it like this. If President Trump were to invite you to the White House and ask you to delineate a policy for him, what would be the salient features of that policy very quickly?
I think the important point is that a national consensus was required on the way forward. That the Afghans themselves had to be consulted. At the moment, you have talks happening between the Americans and the Taliban, one armed group.
No, hold on, Tanya. The thing is that the Afghan governments, previous government, Karzai's government also, this government also, has been wanting to and have tried to, sort of reach out to the Taliban. So there is consensus in Afghanistan that there should be peace. Now, the question really is, how do you go about it? President Trump has taken one route. If you are objecting to that, I want you to give me a sense of how he should have gone about it, according to your analysis.
That it was premature to concede to Taliban demands to exclude the Afghan government from this process.
Okay. And so you go to the Taliban and you say, look, we want to talk and we want to pull you in, but you need to talk to the Kabul government. And the Taliban would have said, look, we don't want to talk to the Kabul government. We will not talk to the Kabul government because we consider the Kabul government as a puppet government. So that would be the breaking point of the talks. Where do you go from there?
And what do? You concede to the armed group that continues to wage attacks across the country, kill women and children as they sit and they talk in Doha. I don't see how that is a viable alternative to holding your ground and taking this process a little bit more slowly rather than look for a hasty withdrawal expedited by the assistance of a neighboring country. At the end of the day, you are undoing more than 15 years of progress that was achieved, in building a state and building a government. In Afghanistan, you're looking at dismantling the entire system that was built. For what? No guarantee.
Okay, Tanya, here's the problem before I let you go. I mean, it's a wicked problem. No one is saying there are any easy solutions here. But it doesn't seem that those who are objecting to Trump's policy also have any viable alternative. But thank you so much for giving us your insights on this issue. Now, back to Dr. Hussain and Mr. Geelani with my theory of what might have happened in Osaka. It seems to me that Modi did speak with President Trump about Kashmir, and what he expected in terms of mediation or arbitration was in fact for the United States to weigh in on Pakistan to the advantage of India. And Trump, as Dr. Hussain mentioned, revealed this. And the Indian media, of course, took it as something, a conversation which, instead of going to the advantage of India, actually goes to the advantage of Pakistan. So that's my theory. And I'm going to ask both my guests, starting with Mr. Geelani, what do they think of this theory? Mr. Geelani.
See, I want to make a couple of points. One is, as far as Kashmir is concerned, all the unionists or pro-India political parties, as well as the pro-independence parties, every single leader has actually welcomed the act of mediation. And they have also argued that if Modi indeed has, made this request to President Trump, then it's a statesman-like, gesture, which should have been welcomed by all, political forces in India. But unfortunately, more than the right-wing parties in India, it is the liberal India which is opposing any idea of mediation. So when it also comes to the, internationalization of Kashmir issue, it is not that Kashmiris or Pakistanis or anyone else has made it international headline. It is because, the Kashmir case is in the UN because of independent India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. So he has taken the case to the UN, so he has made it international headline. Third point was, as far as this particular sentiment of mediation is concerned, I think it's very, very sad on part of, India's intellectual class and Indian media that they seem to be arguing or telegraphing a message that they are averse to any solution. And there's a joke going around in Kashmir on the banks of River Jhelum, which is like, when it comes to Kashmir and, India argues at the international stage that it is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan according to Simla Agreement. And when it comes to discussing with Pakistan, they argue that Kashmir is an internal issue. And when it comes to discussing with Kashmiris, they say it's no issue at all. So that is the story, that it is like a message that Delhi will not bend, come what may, and we are averse to dialogue, we are averse to mediation. So that has saddened, all political forces in Kashmir. In fact, there was this sense that if Modi indeed has made this request, it should have been welcomed. Rather than making him look like some sort of a villain in the parliament, that he needed to explain why he is asking for a solution or mediation. So this is the sense from Kashmir that we are getting.
Absolutely, and I think as I made my opening, Rahul Gandhi, the beleaguered Rahul Gandhi, whose party has been literally knocked out, who was resigned from the presidency of the Congress party, was really, gung-ho and accused Modi of a sellout. Dr. Hussain, sir, what do you think of my theory?
Well, just three quick points. One is that the one unintended consequence of Trump talking about his private conversation with Moeed has been that whatever little opening, if there ever was, of finding a solution to the Kashmir problem, that window has been shut down because of the reaction, adverse reaction from the liberal elite, including Congress. That's one. The other important thing is that what is the two words, mediation and arbitration. Mediation would essentially mean that you are absolutely right that New Delhi's expectation was that Washington will intercede in the matter to the advantage of India, and they were surprised that Trump went out of his way to reveal the entire conversation. That's the second point. And the third point, which is very, very interesting, is that the Kashmir issue, according to the Indians, was a bilateral matter, and they, as Geelani Sahib rightly pointed out, that they were talking in the context of domestic politics of India, that it's an internal matter. What they want is to lay their claims on the territory which is under Pakistan's control. So that has been the Indian position. But now Trump has all of a sudden internationalized the Kashmir issue, and the Indians cannot believe that that the level of confidence that they had with Trump as a leader, as a confidant, and whom they were expecting to weigh in on the Indian side, would take an independent stance and would offer his own mediation or his arbitration in the Kashmir dispute. So, which means that the Indian leadership was not expecting Kashmir or the K word to come up with the conversation between Trump and Islamabad and Imran Khan at all. So, but now that the dam has broken, and the Indian media is crying hoarse over why, and they are going to the extent of calling Trump a liar. So I think in the end, my assessment is that because of this disclosure, because of this controversy, whatever opening there ever was for the Kashmir issue to become the subject of mediation or third-party involvement, that possibility, at least for the time being, for 6 months to a year, has receded totally from our perspective.
Okay. Dr. Hussain, I will return to you to get your perspective on Afghanistan also, but let me quickly go back, Mr. Geelani here. Mr. Geelani, as Dr. Hussain is saying, that this revelation by Trump essentially, and the reaction in India, especially liberal India, means that no one is going to talk about Kashmir, at least for another 6 months to a year. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think, given the sensitivity involved as far as the Kashmir issue is concerned, and the recent history between India and Pakistan, the dogfights in the air, I think Mr. Trump should also have, maintained some kind of, secrecy about this mediation rather than making it public. I think this has also caused some damage, and I partly agree with what Mr. Hussain has said, that for the time being, for the shortest period of time, this may have been a setback, but I think also in the back channel diplomacy, things will move forward, albeit slowly, but I think things will, hopefully will move forward.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Gouhar Geelani was speaking with us from Srinagar. Dr. Hussain, sir, quickly, before I wrap up, you heard the discussion that I was having with Tanya with reference to Trump's policy on Afghanistan. Lots of people are saying, well, the Kabul government should have been included, other stakeholders should have been included. But frankly, what the situation on the ground suggests is that that was not possible, at least not as an opening gambit. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that's the reality on the ground. But there is a risk involved, Ejaz. in Pakistan's commitment to talk to the Taliban, and that commitment has been made at the highest level by the Prime Minister Imran Khan himself, where while speaking at the USIP, he said that he will go back and engage in a conversation with the Taliban. Now, that looks like a great gesture, but it exaggerates the sense of confidence that Prime Minister Imran Khan feels about his conversation with the Taliban. What if Taliban continue to repeat their mantra as they have been in the seven rounds of Doha dialogue, which means that America has to first announce its withdrawal date. Only then we will talk about the subsequent phases, including talking to the government in Kabul. So what happens if the Taliban make this as a sticking point? Where would that leave Pakistan? So which means that Prime Minister Imran Khan has committed his personal leadership and his personal goodwill in trying to convince the Taliban. Let's hope that Taliban will be amenable to listening to him. But in case they don't, then there is a risk for Pakistan.
Absolutely, I agree with that. That's a very important point. Thank you so much, Dr. Rifaat Hussain, for speaking with us. We'll take a short break, and at the other end of the break, discuss China's warning to the United States to stay away from projecting power in China's near abroad. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. China has accused the US and its allies of undermining global strategic stability by deepening their military presence and expanding their alliances, with Beijing also warning that it was ready for war if there was a move towards Taiwan's independence. The declarations on Wednesday came as the Chinese Defense Ministry outlined plans for the further modernization of the armed forces. International strategic competition is on the rise, the ministry said in the white paper, which is the first since 2012 and offers a rare insight into China's military strategy and the workings of the world's largest military force. Accusing the US of adopting unilateral policies, the paper says that Washington has provoked and intensified competition among major countries, significantly increased its defense expenditure, pushed for additional capacity in nuclear outer space, cyber and missile defense, and undermined global strategic stability. To discuss the significance of these declarations, joined by Mr. Einar Tangen from Beijing and Professor Herbert Reginbogin, who is in Washington, D.C. Thank you to both the guests. And let me begin with Mr. Tangen. Mr. Tangen, is this normally China does not, make such declarations, but it has. Does this indicate a sort of, change of Chinese strategy from being more sort of like what we say, like the Sun Tzu kind of strategy, to a more modern or postmodern strategy of projecting power, or saying, well, no one is welcome in our near abroad?
Well, no, I think quite the opposite. What China has said and stressed in the white paper was that they are concerned about domestic issues, not about having hegemony or projecting power overseas. Obviously, there are some issues with the Belt and Road Initiative and being able to protect that. But in this particular case, Taiwan is a bright red line, and no one should mistake that. It's the reunification of Taiwan with the mainland is part of the one China policy that's internationally
But Mr. Tangen, if I were to quickly interject here, as far as the Taiwanese issue is concerned, that's been hanging fire for a very long time, but there's been a modus vivendi on both sides. And there's not been any suggestion on the US side which says that the US wants to change that policy. So why did China deem fit to talk about this at this point?
Well, the U.S. wasn't sailing missiles destroyers up and down the Taiwan Straits, nor was it engaging previously in a trade war or trying to put pressure on China in places by places like Hong Kong, where the Chinese suspect that the U.S. is behind these recent spate of protests that have led to violence, criticism over Xinjiang, Tibet, they feel very strongly that this is part of a full pressure strategy by Donald Trump to try to use security issues to extract financial ones. E.g.,
Okay,
this
that's
economic
that's an interesting point. Professor Reginbogin, sir, would you agree with what Ms. Tangen is saying, that China needed to say this because the U.S. is now embarked on a sort of multi-pronged power projection against China?
China has pursued economic diplomacy through coercion, and it has shown throughout the last 2 years how countries have protested against this kind of dependency. Consequently, America and the West have woken up, and they have now stopped this type of economic diplomacy on the part of China to proceed. This is the blowback. This is why the United States has endorsed an Indochina strategy as of June 1st, initiated by the United States Defense Department, that really outlines the partnership and participants of the countries in the Pacific and India region. And it's a global strategy to counteract what was initiated by the Chinese government starting in 2015, when it spoke about the rejuvenization of its diplomacy to project power into the Pacific.
Okay, so the structural realist argument, as you know, is that some kind of, well, not just the competition, but some kind of conflict is almost inevitable when you have an existing superpower and a rising power. And so China is going to project power, and the United States will obviously then respond to that. So this is the kind of securities trap that some say or think can be avoided. Which side of the equation do you fall, Professor Reginbogin, in terms of is there an inevitability of conflict, or whether China and the US can actually avoid the securities trap that I just talked about?
There is there is a security umbrella that is being discussed in Taiwan, in DC, about how a new security architecture can be implemented, agreed upon by both superpowers, including Russia. This is not just China, Sino-American or Sino-US relations. Russia is heavily involved. So it is a global reset of what was now called the grand rivalry of superpowers. We need to reset and restart and abide by the rule of law.
So you're basically saying that this reset is something that should be done, and that it will help avoid the securities trap. Have I understood you correctly?
The security dilemma.
Okay.
This type of...
Go on.
So this concept is a reconceptualization where island chains are involved, or Eastern European countries are involved as buffer zones. They take the nature of permanent neutrality. They extend that they have no military alliances, but they have all the economic alliances and they have defensive alliances, which means that they are securing their security, their integrity is secured, but also that these countries have all the ability to protect their sovereign territorial integrity.
Okay.
So that.
Okay. Let me go to Ms. Tangen here. Ms. Tangen, same question to you. Is there a structural inevitability about conflict, or is that something that can be avoided?
Well, let's look back to World War I. The idea was to avoid war. No one was looking to get into one. In fact, they did all of these moves. And this is what I hear from the professor. The same kind of we will peace through strength. By selling more arms to the world, we'll make it safer. By investing more money into arms, an arms race, we will make the world better. This is kind of nonsensical. This is the same kind of talk that was used in Iraq, Sudan, everywhere around the world by these kind of warmongering entities. They believe that the military-industrial complex will solve the world. I don't believe so. I believe this course of action is exactly what is entailed.
No, but
in this kind of
here's the thing. Here's the thing. The argument on the other side now is that China, given its huge economic potential and rising prowess, is embarked on power projection in East China, South China Sea, and it's not just about the United States. Also, there are other countries, the littoral states, which are kind of fearful of China's power projection. So, and China is also modernizing its military at a very rapid pace, especially since President Xi Jinping has taken over. So there are these fears, and the professor also talked about the coercive Chinese economic diplomacy. So there are genuine fears on the other side also.
Well, I would just dispute that. I don't. Can you point to any war that China has started or any interference in the domestic affairs of countries? China has a strong trade agenda. They have emphasized in their white paper that their concerns are more domestic, more about interference in what they perceive to be their domestic issues, Taiwan being among those. So this idea that somehow China is the aggressor here, when it's the U.S. who has broken the nuclear treaties with Iran, with the Soviet Union, it is hard to believe that you can kind of turn it around. There's always those who say, I only punched him because he provoked me. How did he provoke me? It's not important. He looked at me funny. So I decided that I would get all sorts of antagonistic towards him. This kind of threadbare approach or argument bears really no water.
Okay, so since I have to wrap up also, and I'll take this quickly back to Professor Reginbogin also. Mr. Tangen, tell me once again, as I said, is there a structural inevitability about conflict, or do you think it can be avoided, and also that it should be avoided?
It should be avoided, but if the U.S. continues these kind of provocative moves, saying that they're going to, in essence, defend Taiwan against the mainland in violation of the one country principle, yes, there is no way out. China will fight. This is not a situation where they might think about it. It's in their constitution.
Okay.
It's something that will continue.
Okay, I got that. Thank you so much, Mr. Tangen, speaking with us from Beijing. Very quickly, Professor Reginbogin, it can and should be avoided, the conflict?
It can and it should be, but it also has to be understood that China has a very smart, intelligent policy to use all of its tactical coercion just to the threshold of using force. So just like my colleague in China likes to present that who is the aggressor, this undercurrent, this undermining of sovereignty of other countries through financial dependency.
Thank you so much, Professor Herbert Reginbogin, speaking with us from Washington, D.C. This is all for today. We shall see you tomorrow. Until then, it's goodbye.